Hello and welcome to another How to Code Well tutorial. Today we're going to further the HTML tutorials, and in this series, this is a new series, we're going to cover HTML forms. So the first thing I'm going to do today is discuss HTML forms in very general sense, and then throughout the course we're going to look at the different input fields that we can use with HTML, and then perhaps progress into something a little bit more technical, how we can actually submit and get the information from the HTML forms. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is actually construct our HTML file. So we do that by just opening up HTML like so, closing that off, opening up a head, and then also under here we need a body. Now, the first thing we want to do when we're creating our form is to actually declare the form tag. So we do that by typing in form and then closing that off. But obviously the form has a set of attributes. So the first attribute that I'm going to show is the method. So method is equal to, and we're going to have, it can either be get or post. See the ID here, let's pick those two out. So we're going to do a post. So the next thing we need to do is supply the destination or the action in which we want to supply the information to. So we do that using the action keyword. Now, if I don't supply an action, then it will just submit the form to itself, so to the containing page. And you may as well just do a hash in that sense, because hash means in itself. But perhaps I wanted to submit this page to something else. Maybe I'm submitting it to a PHP file. So I could do sort of index.php, or this could be called /request.php, or so forth. Currently it's just going to go back to itself, so I'm just going to put in hash like that. Okay, so the next thing we can supply is the name of the form. So we do this using the name attribute, and I'm just going to call it my form. So my-form. It needs to be one word. So either do hyphens or underscores or camel case, but it can't be my form like that. Other attributes that you can supply on the form also contain classes. So these are CSS classes. We haven't really got onto that at the moment. We can also do things like IDs as well, and all sorts of other things as well, like the data types and so forth. So within the form tags, this is where we actually supply the inputs. Now the inputs are the actual form fields, so the checkboxes, the text boxes, the select boxes, and so forth. So we do this by declaring an input tag, and we supply a type attribute to that. So if we did input and then type equals, and if we did text, and notice that this IDE has come up with all sorts of input types. So we want text, for example. So we can also supply a name. So this is the name of the text field, and in this case I'm just going to call it first name, like so. So this input field is actually self-closing. So we can do backslash and then the end tag like that within the field itself. So like, for example, with the form field here, we're actually closing it by putting in an end tag. Well, we don't need to do that with the inputs, because the input, you only have one input. You don't define the actual content of the input. However, we can actually define the value of the input. So for example, we can do a value is equal to temp, right? So let's save this and actually see what's happened to the browser. So let's save that and then go back into Safari and refresh the page. And can you see that we have an input here called temp? Let's scale that up a little bit. So we have temp. Okay, so the next thing we can do is supply a label to this input. So what we do is label, and this isn't self-closing because the label itself has content, the name of the label that you wish to supply. So in this case we're going to do first name. So notice that I haven't actually defined any attributes to this label, but we can. We can actually assign this label to a certain input field. Now we do this using the ID attribute for the input. Now the ID attribute I haven't actually defined here, so let's put one in. Let's put one in here. Let's do ID is equal to first name and save that. And if we did label and we put in 4 and then we equal that to first name. See, my IDE has found that we have an input with the ID of first name. I don't know why I'm pointing to the screen, but input of first name, which means that we can use that in the for attribute. So now we know that this label is for this input. Now it doesn't really make a difference if we remove the for attribute. It just semantically helps us distinguish which label is for which input. So let's now save that and go back into the Safari. Let's refresh the page and notice that we have the first name by the temp input field. Now another attribute that we can put on the input is the actual placeholder. So this is the actual value here, but how about actually putting in a placeholder, so maybe some helper information. So let's go back to PHP Storm and let's do that now. So one of the attributes that we can put in is the placeholder. So if we did placeholder like so, and if we put in please enter your first name and save that. Now notice this is getting quite long, so what I'm actually going to do is split this out a little bit just to make it a little bit more readable. So we're going to do an attribute on every line and then we're going to close that off here. So that becomes your input. Now I wouldn't necessarily do this in production, but just for demonstration purposes here, it's easier to read when it's all on one line. So we have the type, which is a text, the name, which is the first name, value, ID, and the placeholder. So if I was to remove the value and save that, let's just bring that up to here. Save that, go back into the browser and refresh, we can see that we have this placeholder. Now notice that I can't actually select this text, but what I can do is overwrite it. So if I start typing in here, for example, then that placeholder text has been removed. Now if I remove this text, we go back to the placeholder text. So that's the difference between the placeholder and the value. The value is actually the thing that's going to be submitted to the form. If we had a button here, we press submit, then the value is what's going to be used. But the placeholder won't be. The placeholder is just text that is a substitute. It's basically text that you can use to help the user put in the values. Now, we could even remove the label and just have the placeholder. So for example, if we went back to the IDE here, instead of having the label, let's comment this out like that. If we put in first name as the placeholder, so please enter your first name, save, and then refresh, then we have please enter your first name. So obviously the placeholder is longer than the actual input itself. So what I'm going to do is just remove, so I'm just going to put in first name here. So refresh. So you know that this is a first name, so when you start putting in something like Peter, then it disappears and so forth because that's the placeholder. Let's add some more inputs. So this is the first one, and I'm going to add another one, called last name, right? Now notice my IDE has picked up that there's two IDs with the same value, and that is because you can't have two IDs. An ID needs to be unique, so I'm just going to change that to be last name, and again here last name like so, and also on the name as well, that needs to be changed to last name. Save that, go back into here, and we have first name now and the last name. So here we have Pete and Fisher. So we can start building up this form, and these inputs will start just moving to the right of the other inputs. Now let's talk about the type a little bit, the type of the attribute type, the value. At the moment we have text, but this could be a different type. right? So text means the text box, but we could also have something like button. If we save that, refresh this, and reload. So notice that this button doesn't actually have anything on it. It doesn't have the word submit. And notice that we have a placeholder on this button, but obviously there isn't anywhere for this placeholder to go. So what we need to do is supply a couple more attributes or change the attributes that we've got. Let's go back into here. Let's change that to be submit. Submit and then -form for the name. And ID is also going to be the same. Submit. And I'm just going to do BTN for button. Placeholder, we don't need the placeholder because this input doesn't have anywhere for the placeholder to go. But we do, however, need to have a value. So let's just do that. Value is equal to, and I'm going to do please submit. Save that, refresh this, and we can see that we have the please submit button here. And if I was to click that, then that would be submitting the form, right? So we have the first name, which is Pete, and we have the please submit. Now, if I was to change that type back to text, what do you think is going to happen? Well, we've got the value here, so it's going to create a text box with the value please submit. So let's save that, come back into here, refresh the page, and we have the please submit with a value. So if I remove that, like so. So what I'm going to do finally is just put this back to a button, and I'm going to put that back to first name, and we've got our first very basic form. So I'm going to leave that there. In the future videos in this course, we're going to look at other input types and other things that the forms can do. And then later on, we're going to submit the form and actually find the values and so forth. We're also going to talk about some of the differences between the methods, the post method and the get method of the form itself. But that is a very quick demonstration of how to construct a form. Let's go back to the code and I'll leave it like that. Thanks ever so much for watching. Do subscribe to pick up the web chats and the tutorials that I do each week. Happy coding. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Cheers. Bye. Hello and welcome to the second tutorial in the HTML forms course. So last tutorial we looked at how to create a very simple form, which is this one, with the label and input, which is the first name, and the button here. Now we also talked about the method and the action and the name of the form. Today we're going to look at some other inputs. Today we're going to look at some other things that the form can have. So this form actually created this page here, the first name page. So obviously a form has more than one input. In fact, this has got two because of the button and so forth. So let's start creating and building this form up. So what I would like to do is create another input. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to put this here with the last name. I'm going to put that back in. Last name. Placeholder is last name. I'm also going to put in, the last name label too. So I'm going to copy that. Put that in here, just call this last name, and I'm going to just put in enter last name and enter first name in here. Save that. I'm also going to put in a line break, so a BR, right? Save that, refresh the page. Now what this is going to do is put it on the next line, so first name and then last name. If I didn't put the line break in, then the last name would go at the top here. So let's demonstrate that. If I remove this, the BR, then it would wrap on here. So we don't actually want to do that. And now we could get around this by putting it in paragraph tags, but that's really hacky. It's not a paragraph. It's not a paragraph of text. So we can do a BR. Now, This isn't really ideal. What you would do is lay it out using CSS. So this would be this form would be just put on the page as it is, and then CSS, you might wrap this around in some divs, which we'll get onto in future videos, and then create some classes to decide how to actually lay this form out. But for now, we're only going to use BRs just because it's easy to do. I mean, what we could do is even put in some HRs, which are horizontal rules. Let's save that, go into here, which is a horizontal rule. So perhaps we'll do that from now on. So I'm going to put in a HR between here and the button. Save that and refresh the page. We could also do this within a table, but again, a table isn't very semantically good for forms. Essentially, a form should just be a form, and then you would use something like CSS to style the form. We'll get onto all of that later on. Let's just continue now to actually create the other elements of this form. So we have first name, last name. I also want to add in some checkboxes. And the way we do that is have an input with a type of checkbox. And if I was just to have it like so and refresh the page, then we just have a small little checkbox here. But there isn't a name, or there isn't anything that is assigned to this. So when this form gets submitted, we won't be able to distinguish which value is associated to the checkbox. So what we can do, let's just put that up here just to make a little bit more sense with HR. I'm also going to put in a label like so, and I'm going to do subscribe to newsletter. Whoops, if I spell that right without that. Save that, and it's going to be 4, and again we need to have an ID, which is subscribe. So this label is for subscribe. I'm going to give it a name, which is subscribe. Save that, refresh this, and there we go, subscribe to newsletter, and we have a checkbox. But what if we want to have that checkbox to be defaulted to be checked, so defaulted to be ticked? Well, we would do something like this. We would do checked, like so. Now, this doesn't actually need to have a value. It just needs to be called checked, like so. And if we were to refresh this page, it's checked. Semantically speaking, we would have checked is equal to checked, right? Save that and refresh this. So there we go. But it doesn't actually have a value, so we can't actually do unchecked and refresh. Okay, basically this means that if the checked attribute exists, then it is checked. If it doesn't exist, then it's not checked. So this doesn't make any sense. So we can just do checked like so. It's a little bit of a nuance with checkboxes. It's an attribute that doesn't actually need to have a value. So let's save that, refresh this, and we have checked. So subscribe to newsletter, first name and last name. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually have a series of radio buttons. So this is the difference, I suppose, from a checkbox. A checkbox has only got one value. It's either on or it's off. It's either ticked or it's unticked. Whereas a radio button, you have a series of radio buttons, and you can only select one of the options in that. So you can only have one radio button on at one time if it's in the radio button group. Let's go and do that now. Let's go back to the code. So in here, I'm just going to bring in another HR just to space it out a little bit. So in between that, I'm going to have a label. So in this label, I'm going to have a series of options. So this label is going to be about the eye color. So I'm just going to put eye color. And what we're going to do, let me just put in eye color here, is have a series of radio buttons, so eye color, which define an eye color. So that when the user comes to this form, they can select which eye color they have. Okay, so what we need to do again is an input, and then type is equal to radio, right? And also we're going to have a name, and we're going to set that to be eye color, and we're going to have a ID again of eye color, and we're going to close that off. So we're going to have a value in this. So value here is equal to blue. So eye color of blue. Let's save that, refresh the page. We can see that we have eye color and then that here. So that's the radio. Now notice that once it's on, it cannot be changed. Now that is because we need to have another radio of the same name with a different ID. So in fact, I'm going to do eye color blue, and then eye color green. So the value here is going to be green, but the name is going to be the same, right? So let's change that to be blue, and change that to be blue, like so. And we're going to have another label after this one, which is green, and eye color is green. Save that, refresh the page, and now we have two options. So we have eye color blue and eye color green, right? So if I tick that and then tick that, well, notice that because the name of this input is the same, that I can only select one or the other. Whereas with a checkbox, it is either on or off. Right, so you could, I suppose you could say that this is on or off, but the point of this is that you can have multiple radio buttons. So for example, I could do, let's copy that like that. Let's do another one and call this brown. Whoops, sorry, and then have that as brown. And the value here is brown. And save that, refresh this, and now we have brown. So that's eye color of blue, eye color of green, and eye color of brown. Now this isn't displayed very well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a BR, oops, here, and a BR here, and that should space it out slightly. There we go. So eye color blue, in fact this is so in fact, as you can see, that it's actually wrapped around here. So what I need to do is remove that BR from that one and do it underneath this one. So that is, so this becomes the group. Yeah. So we have the label and then the radio. Then we have the label and then close. Take that out and put it under here. The radio. Now, if this was if this had some CSS to it, you would perhaps wrap this within a div. So this would be a div here, that would be a div there, and so forth. We haven't got on to divs yet. I'm going to look at those later on in a later course perhaps. Let's just save this and see what's happened. So refresh here, and then we've got eye color. So that's a little bit better formatted. Let's just change that to be uppercase. Refresh that. Whoops. And what we can do is remove the word eye color. See, it's duplicated all sorts like that. So what we can do is just do blue, we can do green like that, and brown. And what I'm going to do, so this is just some sort of semantic sugar. Just do H2 and do please choose eye color. Save. And then refresh. There we go. Please choose an eye color, blue, green, or brown. And you can only select one of those options. Now, if I was to go to the checkbox here, and let's do another input like this, and do subscribe to other newsletter, and just do other, subscribe other or something as the ID, subscribe other, And let's remove the options for the checked on here, so it's not going to an other here. So I've removed the checked off of here, which means that it's not going to have a default. Let's save that, refresh this, and if I was to tick that and then tick that, so both of those are ticked. So that is the difference between a radio and a checkbox. A radio, you can only have one selection within the name, right? So all of these are named the same, but with a checkbox you can have multiple. And if I was to go back to the code, what I've done is I've changed the name from subscribe other to subscribe, and you can see that with the name here, iColor, 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 that is because you can group the radios together. You can say that that radio is also grouped with that radio by its name. You can't do that with checkboxes because checkboxes are actually individual. If I was to do that, for example, so they're both set to name, go back to the code, refresh the page, tick on that, it's still not ticking here. But later on in the course, when I demonstrate how to actually get the values of these things back, you want to ensure that the names for these checkboxes are unique. Whereas with the radios, what you do is you get back an array of values, all of which are false apart from the one that's set to true. Let's go back to here. Let's change that back to other and save that. I'm going to leave it there, but there's some more that I want to look into with checkboxes and radio buttons, and there's other inputs like select boxes that I will venture into in the next tutorial. But if you found this video helpful, then do give it a thumbs up, do share it around to others that might find it helpful too. Also, do subscribe if you haven't done so already. I do a tutorial like this every week, as well as a web chat every Friday. But for now, thanks again for watching, and I shall see you again in the next tutorial. Cheers. Hello and welcome to the third part of the HTML forms tutorial. Last time we looked at creating these radio buttons and checkboxes. We also added in this new text box here. Now there is another input type that I would like to throw into this mix, and that is the select box. Now a select box isn't actually an input in the same sense as a text field. It is itself its own element. Okay, so let's go and have a look at how we construct the select element. So the first thing we need to do is actually create the select element, and because it's not an input, it actually has its own element node itself. So it's select, and we're going to just put in an end tag here. Now notice that the inputs here, they had their end tags, they were self-closing, whereas with the select buttons, select inputs, they're not. Reason why they're not self-closing is because we can actually supply the options within the select tag itself. So option itself is an element. So we do option, and we're going to do small. We're going to have another option here, and we're going to call that medium, and we're going to have another option, and we're going to have large, like so. We're going to save that, refresh this page, and we can see that we have an option here, select box, small, medium, and large. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually supply some attributes to this select option. Let's take, for example, the label. Let's copy that, put that into here. We're going to have shirt size, and we're going to do 4 shirt size, and again this is going to go red because we haven't got the attribute, the ID attribute here, so we're going to do ID is equal to shirt size, which now goes green, and we're also going to do a name of shirt size. It can be different, but I'm just going to keep it consistent, so shirt size. Yeah, I'm going to just go back to here, refresh. Nothing really is going to change apart from the fact that we have a label. But I don't know if you were quick enough to see that there was actually another set of options that we could have called opt groups. So this basically allows us to group the options together. So let's try that now. Let's go back here. So instead of option, we're going to have an opt group. So the opt group actually has a label itself. So I'm going to add that in now. So I'm going to have short, whoops, and I'm going to close that off. Now notice that we have an end tag for the opt group. So I'm going to copy that, put that into here, save this, refresh the page, and see what has happened. Okay, so notice that this has just suddenly moved slightly, and if we were to open this out, we can actually see that we have a label for short, so small, medium, large in short. Now, what we can do with this is have another opt group like so, put that into here, and we can do long, so like a long shirt or a shorts shirt. So save that, refresh this, and come into here. Now we have these opt groups, so long and short. This is very helpful if, for example, you have a select box of countries and it's aware of which country you're currently in, or it's aware of the previous selection that you had. So it would put in sort of your most used options at the top. So for example, if this was a list of countries, let's just change that to be countries. I should have done this beforehand. So countries, and I'm just going to change that to countries. If I could spell it, country with countries. There we go. Copy that over to here, and copy that too. If this is known, and this is unknown, or if this was previously selected, right? And this is not, so we're just going to leave it like that. If that was the UK, and maybe that was Germany, and let's remove you. Let's put in here, let's do, I don't know, USA, and let's do Africa. So perhaps if that was, instead of previously selected, we could do previously visited or something. Let's save that, refresh the page. Now we've got previously selected, and then we don't have anything under here. What we could do, however, is just do a dash 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 like that, save that, refresh, and now we have a dash dash here. So previously selected is UK and Germany, and then other would be USA and Africa. So for example, if this was some sort of form that was aware of other selections that you possibly had created down the road, maybe if this was, you filled out another form or so forth, and it was intelligent enough to work out what other options you supplied beforehand, then maybe this is a way of indicating what options the user might want to choose. So that's a very good way of having some good user experience. So the select box is actually quite advanced. We can actually do a lot of things with this. At the moment here, it's only got one selection, but we can actually have multiple selections. So for example, if you were to hold down the shift key or the control key, I can't remember which one it is right now, but you can actually add multiple selections to this. At the moment, it's only one, so you click on one and then it disappears and so forth. But you can actually expand this. Let's do that now. Let's go back to the code. And what we need to do is add an attribute called multiple, and we do multiple like that. Now notice that this IDE here isn't saying that there's an equal sign or anything. So remember back with the checkboxes where it's just checked, we can just have multiple. Save that, refresh the page. Whoops. And now we have multiple, and we can scroll down. So previously selected UK, Germany, USA, and Africa, and I can click on multiple ones like that. So when I go and submit it, then I'm submitting multiple answers. If we were to remove the option group, then we would remove these bits and pieces. Let's do that now. So if we were to remove the option group from that one and this, and also that bit, save that, refresh the page, then we just have this selection like so. And again, we can select multiple options if needed. So what we've got so far is a checkbox, two checkboxes, and they're either ticked or unticked. We have a radio button that you can only choose one option, so blue, green or brown, and we have a select box here which we can select multiple items off of it. So I'm going to leave it there. If you found this video helpful, if you found this tutorial useful, then please do give it a thumbs up. Do share it around to others that may find it helpful as well. Do subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. I do a web chat and a tutorial every week. But thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, and I shall see you again in the next tutorial. Thank you. Bye. Hello and welcome to the fourth part of the HTML form tutorial series. In this series we're going to look at the HTML form elements and then create a form, which we are doing now, and then submit the form at the end. So this tutorial I'm going to cover some more elements. Last tutorial we covered the select option here, so we have the options and we also looked at the option groups. So do check out that video if you haven't done so already. Today I'm going to look at the text area. So we've done text boxes before, these are the text boxes at the top, but now we're going to look at text areas. So a text area is basically like a way that someone can actually submit a lot of text. It's not defining what that text should be. Obviously it has an ID and a name, but it's where perhaps a customer can leave comments, right? So it's an open-ended amount of characters up to a certain point, of course, that a user can add bits and pieces, some information, some additional information about the submission, about the data that they're supplying. Okay, so let's go back to the code. And what we need to do is go straight to the bottom here. So this is all the code from the previous tutorials. We're going to put in a HR again. And we're also going to create a label like we've done before. And we're going to copy that. And we're just going to have notes. So we're going to have notes in here as the for. And we're just going to put please add any notes. Save that. So let's now actually create the text area element. So we do that by typing in text area. Now, this cannot be self-closing, okay? If we were to self-close, I'll show you what happens. If we self-close it, it's actually going to break it. Even though my IDE isn't coming up with an error here, if we were to save that, refresh this, then we have please add any notes, that's the label, but notice the text area itself has the rest of the HTML, which is obviously a very, very bad thing. And that's because we've self-closed it. Which we shouldn't do. So we need to do text area. Let's save that. Now I'm not sure if that was an issue with Safari itself, but just remember when you're dealing with text areas, don't self-close them. So let's save that, refresh this, and there we go. So notice here we have 1 and 2 rows, okay? And the columns, the number or the width, if you will, is already predefined. Now we can reduce the amount of columns and rows, and we can increase the amount of columns and rows. Also, I mean, obviously we can press enter and create our own, but when it's displayed, we can actually display the amount of columns, the amount of rows by default. So let's do that now. So let's do text area rows, and let's equal that to 5. So let's save that, refresh here. Now notice that the height has increased. So we have 1, and if I press down or enter, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we have 5 rows before we have to then go and press enter, before the scroll bar comes into play. And we can also do that with columns. So at the moment the columns are done by default, and if we did cols, and we did, let's do 3, save that, refresh, we're going to have a very narrow text area here because we've only got 3 columns. If I increase that to be 100 and save that, that will become much wider like this. And also with the text area, much like the text box, we can also supply a placeholder. So placeholder is equal to please add notes. Save that, refresh here, and we have please add notes. So one could argue that we could remove the label if we wished. And again, if we were to add notes, then notice that the placeholder suddenly disappears. So why is a text area not self-closing? Well, we can actually add stuff within the text area elements here. So for example, if I did a p tag, right, and did test, save that, refreshed here, then we would have p tag test. So this is how a lot of text editors, you know, the WYSIWYG editors use text areas. So if you wanted to create your own code within a form, for example, then that's what you would do. So things like TinyMCE, stuff like FCK editor, all of those things, they use text areas as a way for you to actually add content. So for instance, if you are writing a WordPress blog and you're actually entering text, you'll be entering text within a text area. So you could actually start writing code within this. And lastly, what we need to do here is, because that's in red, we will obviously need to have an ID of notes. Whoops, let's put that into quotes like that, save that. Now the last thing I want to demonstrate in this tutorial is another element, and that element is a way of grouping portions of the form fields together in what's called a field set. And if we can see here, we've got a text area, we've got countries, we've got eye colors, and we've got subscription here. We've got subscribe to another newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter. We've also got last name and first name and so forth. We can actually group these things together. So I'm going to group the subscriptions together, and we're going to do that within a field set. So what we're going to do is create a field set that groups the subscription options together. So we're going to do field set, and by default it doesn't require any attributes, so that's fine. And we're just going to contain both the checkboxes and their labels. So I'm just going to tab that out to make it a little bit more readable. So we have a field set like so. Let's save that and refresh this page, and we can see that we've grouped it. We've actually put it within this sort of box type thing here. We can go another step further and actually put some sort of label, or as it's called, a legend, against this field set. So let's go back to the code and put in inside here, do a legend, and we're going to do subscription options. Refresh the page, and notice that we have this legend at the top, this subscription options, almost like a label, but it's within the field set as well. So what I can do now is I can actually remove this HR from here and remove this HR from here. Save that, refresh, and there we go. And we can go one step further. If we did a field set within these inputs here, so if we did a field set like that, and we had a legend which just had something like user data or profile, even profile. Let's put that and replace this, put that here, so field set, and let's just move that like so. Refresh. Now we have a profile. Okay, so notice that we're grouping these things together. So with please choose your eye color, that can actually be a legend on this field set. So let's scroll down here where we've got, so we've done that. So now eye color here. So we're going to remove the H2 tags and we're going to do field set because this is actually going to be a legend. Whoops, and close that legend off like that to here, and we're going to close that field set off. like so. And let's just tab these in to just make it, again, a little bit more readable that it's in this field set. Now save that, go back here, refresh, and we can see that we now have that within a field set. Again, we can also deal with the countries. So here we have another field set, and in fact we can just we can replace the label here with the field set and change that HR, close that off to be field set, and within, whoops, here we can do a legend like so, and the legend is going to be please choose a country, or I don't know, yeah, just do country selection. Save that, refresh, and we have country selection now. Next thing we can do is with the please add any notes. So we can do remove that label if we needed to. Now usually a field set would have more than just one field in it, okay? So I'm kind of just screwing around here just to give you an idea of how you can structure, the form. So field set and then legend, other notes, let's capitalize that and capitalize the S as well, make it a little bit consistent. A refresh, and now we have other notes. So please add any notes and country selection. So all of these now are within their field sets. And notice that we've done that, and so the please submit has actually moved below this rather than by the side of it, which looks a bit better in my opinion. So that is a very quick demonstration of using text areas and also field sets to group fields together and how that can influence the layout and design of a form. So if you found this video helpful, if you've enjoyed it, then do give it a thumbs up. Do share it around to others that you may think might find it useful as well. Do subscribe if you haven't done so already. I do a tutorial like this every week as well as a web chat every Friday. Thanks again for watching. Happy coding, everyone, and I shall see you again in the next tutorial. Cheers.